I cut a lot of hair when I was in high school. I mean, I cut enough hair that I purchased 2 motorcycles with my hair cutting money.
This is John Dodd. John grew up in Gilmer, Texas, and he's not lying when he says he cut a lot of hair back when he was in high school.
I used to cut a lot of the boys' hair and even some of the girls' hair. I used to charge $3 a haircut.
On the night that Kelly Wilson vanished from Gilmer, Texas, guess what John was doing? Yeah, he was cutting hair. Two of John's friends came by, and their names were Chris Denton and Marvin Pritchett.
It was dark by then. Of course, it was January the 5th. And so, it was getting dark probably about 5 o'clock in East Texas. And Marvin and Chris had come over.
Chris, you probably remember. Chris Denton was one of the first suspects in Kelly's case. Marvin is another name we talked about earlier in the podcast, and I'll tell you more about him in a little bit.
Now, I can't tell you 100% if I cut Chris's hair that night or Marvin's hair, but I know for a fact they were at the house. They were waiting for me because we were going to go to Gilmer and just grab some chicken or something like that. I am guessing that it's going to be sometime around 7, 8 o'clock or so. I got finished cutting hair and we all went out and we got into Marvin's truck. Marvin was sitting in the driver's seat. Chris was in the middle and I was in the passenger seat. And before we pulled out of the driveway, I heard a voice tell my mind and said, get out of the car. And I told him, I said, hey man, you know what? I don't think I'm going tonight. And Marvin and Chris looked at me and they said, why not, John? And I said, I got homework to do. And they looked at me and I looked at them and we all laughed. And the reason why that was funny is because I never did homework. Like my whole high school career, I never did homework. And so they knew that I wasn't going to go do homework. But I reaffirmed and I just said, look, I'm getting out.
So John was a senior the same year as Kelly Day Wilson. And on the night she disappeared, January 5th, 1992, he was supposed to be in that truck. He got out instead. And that decision to climb out over homework he had no intention of doing is the only reason John Dodd wasn't riding around Gilmer with his two friends on the last night anybody can account for Kelly. Because of that feeling he had, John escaped the allegations that would hound his friends, especially Chris, for years. But John was about to get drawn into the case anyway, and you might be surprised to learn how that happened.
Now, here's where I'm telling you, independent from any other person on this planet, because I witnessed it with my own eyes.
From Free Range Productions in association with Imperative Entertainment, I'm Wes Ferguson, and this is Deviltown. Chapter 13, The Tape. All right, let me back up and tell you more about John Dodd. Most of the people who have reached out to me about Kelly are, regular folks. They've got a rumor or a memory or a theory they heard from a cousin, and I take it all seriously, but I also take it all with a grain of salt because, that's the job. John is a little different because John does this for a living. He's a federal police chief, and he spent his entire career working major crimes, homicides, all the serious stuff.
Just FYI, I'm a child forensic interviewer. I've been doing it since 2009. And listen, I am an evidence-based person. I have to be. I don't have the luxury of just believing people because they tell me something, right? My job requires us to provide evidence. And one of the reasons why in the past I haven't ever got involved is because some of the cases that I've worked in my career, I'm a federal investigator. And I've spent my career doing this kind of stuff.
So this is kind of John's whole thing. He's a guy whose entire career is built on not getting carried away, on not deciding what happened first and then going out looking for proof. He'll actually tell you more than once that he's careful about what he'll swear to and what he won't. And that's part of why, for 30 years, John mostly stayed out of this. He had a demanding job, a life out west, and a healthy suspicion of the kind of storytelling that had already turned Kelly's case into an absolute circus. But John is not a stranger to this story, not even close. His father is John Melvin Dodd. If you've been with me for a while, you know Melvin. He's one of the founders of the Justice for Kelly Wilson Committee, the group of folks in Gilmer who never stopped pushing, never stopped believing there was more to this than the official version. I interviewed Melvin at least once, maybe a couple of times.
You're going to write a book about this or what?
No, sir. I'm making a podcast series.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to have to answer a phone here. I don't think it's going to take me long. Hello? What? Didn't even make any sense.
So John is extremely familiar with all of this. And even more than that, he grew up with the people who ended up at the center of it. He told me he had 3 best friends in high school, and one of them was Chris Denton. Now, Chris Denton has often been described as Kelly's boyfriend. The people that know them say that's not true. They just had a hookup, basically. But for 30 years, Chris Denton was law enforcement's favorite suspect in her disappearance. Chris died back in 2004, and we spent a good chunk of an earlier episode or two on him. And just so we're clear, no one ever proved that he actually had anything to do with her disappearance. But we do know that Chris was in that truck that night cruising around Gilmer when Kelly disappeared, and so was Marvin Pritchett, another kid from that same circle. These guys were John's friends, which brings me back to his grandma's driveway. Because when John tells that story about the voice saying, "Get out of the car," my first instinct, honestly, is probably the same as yours. It's a good story, but it's just a feeling, a hunch. How much can you really hang on that? And then John told me why he listened to that voice. In 1988, John and Chris's older brother Alan were in a horrible car wreck.
Alan and I had just dropped his girlfriend off in Longview at her house, and we were driving back in his little old 1980-something Ford Escort, little 2-door. And I remember I was in the back seat because we were wasted. And I'm talking about I'm laying across the back seat. And so I'm curled up laying there. And then I hear a voice tell me, he said, "Get up, get in the front seat." And I woke up and I saw Alan. He was on the front porch kissing the wind. And I crawled over and got in the passenger seat and I laid my chair all the way back and I went right back to sleep. And we're driving from Longview back to Gilmer. And there was 2 ways to get to my house. One way you could turn left and you could go by the old Dean Lake and go to my house that way. The other way was you had to go in through town. Well, when we pulled up, I woke up. The reason why I'm telling you this, though, Wes, is because you remember certain things. And this is why I remember this very vividly. That little voice, this is probably the first time that I recall ever hearing a voice to somebody or something talking to me into my mind. And we pulled up to 271 from 300, and a voice tells me, he says, "Turn left." And I said, "Hey, Alan, why don't we turn left?" And he looked at me like, "What for?" And I was like, never mind then. Let's just go, whichever. And I fell back to sleep. And we got hit by another car going 60 miles an hour. And I got ejected from the vehicle. Okay. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. And I broke my left side of my face. I had reconstructive surgery on my face. I got screwed up and glass all over my body, my head, my back, it screwed me up pretty good. And so I remember I told them, I said, "Man, I heard a voice tell me to get up, get in the front seat, and then to turn left instead of turning right." And I didn't listen to it. I said, I listened to it, but I didn't convince Alan, you know. And I said, I'll never do that again. If I ever hear that voice in my head telling me to do something, I'm going to do it and I'm going to listen. Well, here it was years later. This time I'm a senior, January the 5th. I go hop in the car. All we're doing is we're going to town. We're going to JR's to that gas station. You know, I was just probably going to go eat some chicken and eat some potatoes, And the next thing you know, that same voice came to me and said, "Get out." And I was like, "Oh, snap." I remembered that.
Now, I'm not here to tell you what that voice was. John's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and to him, this is a spiritual thing. So you could believe that or not believe it. That's totally up to you. What I can tell you is that it's not something John made up for a podcast. His dad told me a version of this same story several years ago before John and I had ever spoken. It's back in episode 10.
And John said he just got a strong impression, don't go. So he told him, change my mind, I'm not going. So they stopped and he got out. That is the only reason my son John was not up in Gilmer with them the night that Kelly Wilson disappeared.
So that's John. But none of that, the voice, the driveway, the wreck, none of that is why John finally picked up the phone and called me after 30 years. He called me because of something he says that he saw with his own eyes. Something on a piece of evidence that's been sitting at the center of this case since the very beginning. After the break, John gets his hands on the bank video and he takes it somewhere no other investigator ever did.
As plain as day, as I'm looking at the sun right now in the sky, James Brown was the one who was in that van.
All right, so to understand what John says he saw, I just want to quickly remind you about the bank video because we talked about it all the way back in episode 2. So here's the short version. The night that Kelly disappeared, part of her job at that video store was to take the day's cash to the bank just a couple blocks away and drop it in the night deposit box. And there was a surveillance camera at the bank, and it captured a few vehicles coming through around the time that Kelly would have made the drop. The problem was that back in 1992, that footage was, well, it was terrible. Grainy, dark, low quality. Sergeant James Brown, the Gilmer police officer who ran the search for Kelly, told the media that the video showed Kelly making that deposit. Even though from everything we've been able to tell, the camera didn't really show that clearly at all. And here's a refresher on James York Brown. 2 years after Kelly vanished, Brown himself got arrested and was charged as part of that alleged satanic cult along with the Kerr family and several others. And then the Texas Attorney General's office came in, they took the case apart, found no real evidence behind any of those charges, and dropped every charge. Brown has always maintained he had nothing to do with Kelly's disappearance, and he was never convicted of anything. As far as the law is concerned, and as far as I'm concerned, James York Brown is an innocent man. And here's James himself from an interview we played earlier in the season where he's talking about those first days searching for Kelly. This is back from episode 2.
There's a lot of interviews that were done with last people that had contact. And from there, you start narrowing your focus. And of course, I wasn't alone in the investigation.
For a long time in this story, that's who James Brown was, the officer running the case. So I want to be crystal clear before I tell you this next part, because this next part is John Dodd looking at that same grainy video and telling me he sees that same man somewhere he was never supposed to be. And how did John, this high school kid at the time, or maybe fresh out of high school, end up with this bank tape at all? He says it came through the back door. Kelly's father had hired a private investigator down in Louisiana, and that PI somehow got hold of a copy of the surveillance video, and he's the one who handed his material over to the Justice for Kelly folks. And a copy of the bank video made its way to John.
I take that copy over to my cousin, Jeff Dodds. Jeff had gotten his degree at Brigham Young University, and it had something to do with like graphic design. And he had a brand new state-of-the-art computer. We took, and I say we, myself, Sam Robinson, Denny Pilcher, went over to Jeff's house with this video. We had Jeff analyze this on his computer, and he blew it up. He was able to remove some of the static and stuff off of this, and he blew up this video and the still shots taken from the surveillance video.
So picture this. It's the mid-90s. 4 young guys crowded around a computer in somebody's house, watching a blurry frame of video get bigger and clearer line by line. And John says what came into focus is the thing he's been carrying around for 30 years.
Now, here's where I'm telling you that I know of myself independent from any other person on this planet, independent from Melvin Dodd, independent of any other person, because I witnessed it with my own eyes. We blew those videos up, those still shots up, those frames up. And as plain as day, as I'm looking at the sun right now in the sky, James Brown was the one who was in that van. There was another person who was sitting in the passenger seat who I could not identify because you couldn't see his face. But Geneva Kerr was in the back.
Geneva Kerr, the woman the state once accused of being at the head of that satanic cult, the one whose charges, like Brown's, got dropped for lack of evidence. John says he saw her and James York Brown in a van at the bank the night Kelly disappeared, not making a deposit like Kelly was supposed to do. John says the van pulled up first around 8:15 and the driver leaned out and dropped an envelope and the night deposit. Now, here's something else important. John's own father, Melvin, has told this video story publicly for years. But when John describes it, he actually corrects his dad on the details.
I had a talk with my dad. I said, Dad, James never got out of the car. Well, you most certainly did. I said, Dad, James never got out of that vehicle. He leaned out. That's why we could see him. And he never got out. And I said, Dad, he wasn't wearing a police uniform either. He was wearing a jacket. Now, Dad was inaccurate when he said that you could see her through the window, through the glass. No. James Brown had the window of that dark colored van rolled down. He leaned out. Geneva was sitting directly behind him in the back seat, and she leaned up and stuck her face in between the seat and the door jamb. And she is looking directly at whatever James is doing, but her face is as plain as day in the camera.
Melvin has been telling this story one way, but John, the trained investigator, the guy who was actually in the room when they enhanced the footage, is gently telling his own father he got the details a little wrong. Brown leaned out, he didn't get out. A jacket, not a uniform. Geneva's face at the door frame, not against the glass.
Plain as day. I saw this, Jeff Dodd saw it, Denny saw it, Sam saw it.
Now, I have to be honest with you about what this is and what this isn't. This is just John's account, his memory, and his read on a piece of grainy video from 30 years ago. No investigator, no prosecutor, no jury has ever confirmed what John says he saw. James Brown was cleared, Geneva Kerr was cleared, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that John is right. But I also can't quite let go of the question John keeps coming back to. Because whatever you make of the voice in the driveway, John is not some guy with a wild theory. He's a professional, and he has one question that really bugs me.
Here's what's so disturbing to me. How come a 24, 25-year-old, if I was that age, but somewhere between 23 and 25 years of age, how come I can take a video and go make an absolute definitive identification on who the driver was? And how come that was never done by the investigative parties? How come that's never been done by the FBI?
How come nobody with a badge and a budget ever did what 4 kids did around a computer one afternoon? I don't have a great answer for that, and John doesn't either. But he'll be the first to tell you that his answer, even if he's 100% right about what he saw, doesn't actually prove anything on his own. After the break, the catch. The one thing John's entire theory depends on, and it leads me to a name I had never heard before.
It's not John Dodd telling you what I saw, because, Wes, you haven't seen it. You're not convinced, right?
So here's where John, to his credit, turns this whole thing on himself. Because he knows what I was thinking. He knows that a guy saying, I saw James York Brown on a tape 30 years ago, is not the same as proof. Far from it.
Here's the thing, though. I'm telling you as an experienced investigator that if you were ever to get your hands and to solve anything, your key is the video. It's not John Dodd telling you what I saw, because, Wes, you haven't seen it. You're not convinced, right? I can get up in front of a damn jury all day long and rant and rave and tell you and cry and everything else and say, oh my God, it was James, But until the jury sees that video to confirm that that individual is in fact beyond a reasonable doubt, James Brown, it's irrelevant.
I really respect that. A lot of people who come to me with a theory want me to just believe them. John wants me to go check. And there's one particular thing he wants me to check because it's the piece his whole theory rests on. Remember, the official story was that the car at the bank was Kelly's making that deposit. John says no, one of those vehicles that came through at 8:31 p.m. was a white Ford Mustang, and it didn't go to the deposit box. It pulled up to the ATM, and John says he knows exactly whose Mustang that was. It belonged to a classmate of his and Kelly's, a girl named Stacy.
James Brown insisted in his case that that was Kelly Wilson who drove her Dodge through there and made the night deposit, but that's inaccurate. That was Stacy in her white Ford Mustang and her boyfriend, and she testified to that to the grand jury. That wasn't Kelly, but that was her.
Okay, now hang on, because this is a big deal. John's whole case comes down to this. If the car at the bank wasn't Kelly, then the official timeline falls apart, and the door opens to everything else John is saying. And as proof that it wasn't Kelly would be Stacy. John says Stacy stood up in front of a grand jury and swore it was her at the bank, not Kelly. He says he saw her there.
I got called in front of the grand jury. Okay. I remember seeing Stacy there at the grand jury.
John says that even years later, he and another Justice for Kelly member named Glenn Leach tracked down Stacy in Houston and interviewed her, and she said the same thing again. That is a very specific, very checkable claim. And here's a surprising part. Across everybody I talked to, I had never once heard the name Stacy. John could not believe that.
I can't believe that this is the first time you've ever heard the name of Stacy. So this is insane to me.
So I did what John asked. I went and found her. Actually, Jennifer Dean, a friend of Kelly's that you've heard from many times throughout the show, helped put us in touch. And I want to be straight with you. Stacy was a little nervous about being on the show at all. She's got a career, she's got a community, and she asked me to be careful. So you're going to hear a short piece of our conversation, but she asked us to not include her last name. Okay, so I got Stacy on the phone, and pretty early on, I asked her the thing that John's whole theory hangs on. Did she testify to the grand jury that the car at the bank was hers?
Well, I didn't testify before a grand jury for anyone. I'm not sure where that information came from. Jennifer had said that to me, so I did not.
So the whole theory of John's, the fact that's supposed to prove the car wasn't Kelly's, is that Stacy testified to the grand jury, and now Stacy says it never happened. She does say that an investigator, maybe a private investigator, came and interviewed her about the case in like 1996 or so.
And just asked me questions, but I mean, kind of the same thing now, Wes. I didn't really have much to add other than I drove through the bank that night. So I don't know if both of us drove through. I know I drove through.
Now, she didn't contradict everything. Some of what John said, she did confirm.
Well, I drove a white Mustang GT. I went to the ATM machine to get money. I wouldn't have been making a deposit.
So that part lines up perfectly. She did drive a white Mustang, and she was at the bank that night. She hit the ATM. She wasn't making a deposit. So John's not pulling this out of thin air. There really was a girl in a light-colored car at the bank that night. That much is real. The sworn grand jury testimony is the one thing that Stacy says never happened. And here's what gets me. I don't think either of them is lying. I really don't. John's not a liar. He's careful. He's a credible guy. And he clearly believes that Stacy testified to the grand jury. And Stacy has no reason to deny that. She's just telling me what she remembers. That's kind of the whole thing about this case, right? Every time you think you've finally got something solid to stand on, it just sort of slips out from under you. But John left me with one more thing, because for all his talk about how it doesn't matter what he saw, there is a way to settle at least part of this, the actual tape. Not John's memory of it, but the tape itself, the video. So I went looking for it. And the first place I tried was an old Dateline episode about Kelly's case. John told me he'd heard that the producer who made that episode, way back in 2002, had looked at the bank video and come away seeing exactly what he saw. So I tracked her down. Her name is Marcia Bartell, and when she replied to my email, she told me the opposite. She said that she did not see James Brown in that video and she did not have a copy of it. If I wanted the tape, I'd have to take that up with Dateline. Fat chance, right? So just to reiterate, nobody official ever made the same identification that John did. Not the Gilmer police, not the FBI, not the Attorney General's office. And the one person outside this case that I knew of who actually studied that video very closely, the producer who made the Dateline episode, told me she didn't see James Brown in it either. So back when Deviltown was coming out the first time around, I had only seen a few short clips from the bank video, plus some screenshots. And to me, the guy in the van doesn't really look like James Brown. Not that it's really easy to tell one way or the other. But then, after we finished making our first round of episodes, Kelly's dad, Robbie, actually found the bank surveillance footage in a box of old videotapes. I think he said they were out in his garage. He sent the box to me, and I had all the videos digitized. And, well, to be perfectly honest, when I hit play, I still couldn't make heads or tails of any of it. We'll share the video in our newsletter, unforgottenpod.com, so you can see for yourself. Maybe it'll make more sense to you.
She got off work at 8 o'clock.
This is Melvin again, John's dad.
8:32, something about that time. A van pulled in there, and a man got out and made a deposit. And this man, I guarantee you, was James Brown in a Gilmer police uniform. Well, there was an old woman sitting right behind James Brown, and she put her face up to the clear glass of the window, and it was Geneva Kerr.
So that's it for this episode, and next time on Deviltown, we are going to go in a totally different direction. We're going to unpack a weird detail about the slash tire that has always stuck with me and what it tells us about Kelly and her case. Deviltown is a free-range production in association with Imperative Entertainment. The show was created by me, Wes Ferguson, and edited by Aislinn Gaddis. Music by Robert Ellis. For updates on this case and others, join our free newsletter at unforgottenpod.com. As always, thank you for listening.